In the best of conditions, tractor trailers are dangerous vehicles simply due to their size and weight. The average semi can carry more than 40,000 pounds of cargo, let alone the mass of the truck, fuel, and the trailer. The average passenger vehicle, on the other hand, weighs only 4,000 pounds, a deadly match in any collision. In this Insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Brandon Dickerson's story, our news team is on location in Austin, Texas, meeting with Todd Kelly, partner at the Carlson Law Firm, and Dr. Huma Haider, founder of the National Brain Injury Institute, one of America's leading traumatic brain injury experts, to discuss the specific legal challenges and strategies to win this case, as well as how traumatic brain injuries are identified, diagnosed, and assessed in these catastrophic accidents. Todd has earned a reputation as an unyielding trial lawyer who repeatedly represents individuals and families against big companies and the Goliaths of the world, and repeatedly wins. He has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Texas. Todd has built a substantial reputation nationwide by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down, and his amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Austin, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Todd Kelly to the show. Welcome to the show, Todd.
Thank you, Steve. Good to be here.
Tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your firm.
I'm a board-certified trial lawyer. I have been practicing law for about 25 years, a little over. I work at the Carlson Law Firm. I manage the North Austin office of the Carlson Law Firm. We are predominantly a personal injury trial firm. We represent everything from car wrecks to sexual assault, human trafficking cases, and we have a few lawyers that actually do some mass tort cases. So we kind of run the gamut of personal injury. We have 14 offices in and around Texas, with one in Los Angeles, actually.
Todd, tell our audience a little bit about Brandon Dickerson, who is your client now.
Brandon Dickerson was a 18-wheeler operator himself. He was a commercial driver, and he was actually delivering a load in New Mexico. He was driving south on 285 just over the Texas border, or not too far over the Texas border. And as he was driving southbound, an oncoming rig owned by Madrid's Hotshots, is what they called themselves, swerved into his lane. Brandon tried to swerve. He moved over into the right. He actually was driving partially on the shoulder when the truck hit his truck, kind of sideswiped it, but it caused some pretty significant back and forth movement and trauma to the truck. Ultimately, he suffered some traumatic brain injury, which is going to be life-altering for him. He can't work. As you might know, truck drivers have to take a physical examination and be qualified and okay to drive, and Brandon no longer can.
What is the meaning of admitted liability? How's that play in here?
First of all, there is no admitted liability here. They're denying liability, and in fact, despite the fact that there is an eyewitness and a police report that lays out the facts just as I've told them, and the fact that the physical evidence on the road, what they call the yaw marks on the road, our expert has looked at and said absolutely this collision occurred not only in the southbound lane, but pretty far over in the southbound lane, which supports Brandon's position that he was actually trying to get over to take evasive action from this oncoming 18-wheeler. However, the driver and the company of the Madrid's Hotshot vehicle have told us and have actually filed a countersuit saying that we had swerved into the northbound lane, causing the crash.
That's totally untrue.
It's so totally untrue, Steve, that when we got a hold of the eyewitness to this crash, who incidentally was the car immediately behind the northbound truck, when we first got a hold of him, we asked him what happened. He said, "Well, I'll tell you, but if you don't try to change my testimony." And somewhat taken aback, we said, "What do you mean try to change your testimony. So, well, the last lawyer that called me tried to get me to change my testimony. Sir, we just want to know what happened. I said, okay. So what happened was that I was northbound following a truck, the Madrid's hotshot truck, and it started to swerve, and it swerved into the southbound lane, and as soon as it swerved into the southbound lane, there was an explosion, is how he described it. But he went on to talk about how the lawyer who first contacted him tried to get him to change his testimony, to talk about how the driver of the Madrid's truck was still seat belted in. He said, no, he wasn't seat belted in, he was ejected. And he said, well, certainly the truck going south is the one that caused it. He said, absolutely not. And so what we know from that is this countersuit on the behalf of the defense, not only is it false, but they know it to be false when they filed it.
What are the repercussions of a lawyer who files a case when he knows what he is writing and submitting to the court is false?
This is my very first case in New Mexico, under New Mexico law. I was licensed in New Mexico just this past year, but I've been practicing law in Texas for a couple of decades. I've been practicing law for 25 years. And in every jurisdiction where I've practiced before, this kind of behavior will get the lawyer sanctioned, either monetarily, it can be a reprimand, all the way up to disbarment if you're trying to tamper with witnesses. I don't know how the court in New Mexico will handle this, but there's a wide array of things that they would be permitted to do.
Because what he is in effect doing is delaying the eventual outcome, which is they're going to have to pay some money, okay? So by delaying that, we talked about this before the show, it really puts at a great disadvantage your client because he's suffering. He has injuries that maybe are not being attended to as they should be right now with the type of care that he needs. And the court must recognize that, right?
You know, the standard defense mantra is delay, deny, and defend, right? And that's what's happening here. It's delay. Of course, they're denying the facts, and they're going to defend the case. But when you delay and deny and defend dishonestly, there should be some repercussion for that because, you know, Brandon Dickerson can't work. So, you know, one of the things that typically a defendant will hope to do is to starve the plaintiff out. We're not going to let that happen here, but, you know, some lawyers can't afford to not let that happen. But we're going to make sure that Brandon stays afloat long enough to see true justice served in this case. And it is a miscarriage of justice to allow a defendant to get away with this because sometimes, in some cases, they will.
Today we have with us one of the leading experts on traumatic brain injury, Dr. Huma Haider. So let's bring her on right now so she can talk about some of these injuries that any client would suffer. We'll bring her on now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Huma Haider to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Tell our audience a little bit about your institute that you have in Houston, and I understand you have 6 offices around the country. What is it called and what do you do?
My medical practice is called National Brain Injury Institute. I started that about 3 years ago. We started from Houston, but now we have offices in Dallas, San Antonio, Los Angeles, Orlando, and Phoenix. At National Brain Injury Institute, our goal and our focus is to diagnose and provide the appropriate treatment and rehabilitative care that these patients who suffer from mild, moderate, and severe traumatic brain injury, they need and they deserve that care and treatment.
When you have patients that are referred to you, that come into your office, what are the steps that you take to determine whether someone actually has traumatic brain injury?
When a patient suffers from a traumatic brain injury, they go through, some patients will recover in the first 3 months, but after 3 months, if the patient continues to have physical symptoms, cognitive symptoms, and behavioral symptoms, then the likelihood of these symptoms becoming chronic is very high. And these patients require appropriate diagnosis and treatment to stabilize their symptoms, to treat their symptoms, to make their symptoms prevent them from getting worse moving forward. So when the patients come to National Brain Injury Institute, we are performing comprehensive neurological evaluations for these patients, and then we are coming up with a treatment plan. and the diagnostic studies or the rehabilitative care that the patient needs. So the treatment plan consists of treatment of the symptoms that the patient is suffering from. For example, 95% of the patients with traumatic brain injury will suffer from post-traumatic headaches. So the first thing that we do is we start them on pharmacological treatment. What it is we will prescribe them medications to prevent the headaches, to abort these headaches, or to use some medications as needed. Now, if the pharmacological treatment doesn't work, then we go to the next step. The next step involves giving them some injections that are related to the treatment of post-traumatic headaches. Those injections include Botox injections, greater occipital nerve block injections, lesser occipital nerve block injections. If those injections don't work, then we go to the next step. Then we are using some non-invasive neuromodulation devices, which are very helpful in controlling the symptoms of the patient. Now, if those non-invasive neuromodulation devices, they also do not provide adequate relief for the patient's symptoms, then we go to the next step, which is surgical step, where we can do occipital nerve decompression or some other minimally invasive procedures to provide relief to the patient. So that is one symptom that we are giving them treatment of. Now, another common symptom that these patients suffer from, cognitive deficits. For example, they're going to have deficits of short-term memory. They're going to have deficits of long-term memory. They're going to have attention deficits. So what we are doing is that we are first performing comprehensive evaluation of their deficits. And based on the information that we are getting, then we are coming up with the targeted treatment plan for the patient. For example, if they are showing major deficits in memory, then we're going to provide them rehabilitative care in the memory domain. For example, if they're having major deficits in attention area, then we're going to provide them targeted treatment and give them exercises where it's going to help improve their attention span. Now, if they're having major deficits in executive functioning or their judgment area, then we're going to provide them treatment that will help improve and strengthen those functions of the brain. Now let's go on to the third aspect of traumatic brain injury, which is behavioral symptoms. Many patients will suffer from depression, anxiety, irritability, fatigue, mood swings. So we perform assessments, comprehensive, to diagnose their mood disorders, and then we're going to provide them targeted treatment for those mood disorders as well. And those treatments include pharmacological treatment, such as prescribing them medication, but a big part of it is combining the pharmacological treatment with therapy, such as a psychotherapy, such as a counselor who could meet with these patients, who could on a weekly basis or a twice weekly basis and go over the challenges, difficulties, or the symptoms that they are experiencing and provide them the tools that will help them through their journey after their traumatic brain injury.
These counselors, these therapists, are they at your institute too?
Yes, we do have a full-time licensed professional counselors who provide psychotherapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, eye movement desensitization therapy. They also provide cognitive rehabilitation therapies as well. We also have psychologists on staff who also participate in providing the therapies and neurocognitive rehabilitation.
Right. I also want to clarify one thing. Sometimes when you have a traumatic brain injury, the symptoms do not exhibit themselves right away. It could be not just weeks or months, it could be years later, correct?
Yes, many patients, I would say hundreds of patients that I have seen, they have been suffering from the symptoms of traumatic brain injury. As you know, I keep on elaborating that they can have physical symptoms, they can have cognitive symptoms, they can have behavioral symptoms, and these patients have been experiencing those symptoms for months and years, but they were unidentified. They have gone through many different doctors. They go through chiropractors, they go through pain doctors, they go through primary care physicians, they go through orthopedic doctors, but the cluster of the symptoms that these patients experience, nobody is asking them about those symptoms. And if they're not being asked about those symptoms, then patients, they do not volunteer that information because they themselves are not able to connect all the dots together that the symptoms that I'm experiencing are because of the traumatic brain injury. And that leads us back to the fact that traumatic brain injury is undiagnosed, underdiagnosed, and untreated. Many medical providers are not aware of that. Many medical providers are not trained to do that, and many medical providers are not putting forth the time and effort to identify and diagnose traumatic brain injury. As a result, patients go undiagnosed and untreated for years. I have seen patients who come to me 4 or 5 years later, and during the entire 4 or 5 years, they have been struggling, they have been disabled, they have been in pain, but as I said, they were unfortunate to suffer with these symptoms for such a long time.
And Todd, you know this in trying many of these cases, that one of the ways you're able to compare the before and the after, right, is by interviewing some people who are close to them, their wives, sure, their former coworkers.
Coworkers are really key, because a lot of times the coworker will say there's just been a dramatic change in this person. Often promotions that were expected don't happen. Sometimes people actually lose their jobs. But it's, it would be axiomatic that a person with a brain injury doesn't know they have a brain injury a lot of the time. It's the very tool that they would use to determine whether or not the brain is injured is the brain, and it's injured, so they can't really get there. But other people observing them is really the key. And when you talk about these changes, and some of them are really dramatic.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. You had a lot of insight, because I see, as you have mentioned, Todd, I see that, it's almost impossible sometimes for the individual who's been injured to be able to relate to what they used to do and what they're not able to do today, correct?
That is correct. And as Todd mentioned, it is very helpful to get this information or ask this from the family members, which we do on a routine basis, and they would come because the patients who are coming to us, they have brain injury, they are having memory problems, they themselves don't remember the entire extent of their injury, entire extent of their damage. But people who are around them, who are with them on a day-to-day basis, who are observing them, they are able to give us so much information about their change in personality that that they have become a completely different person. They are arguing all the time. They're irritable all the time. They have a short fuse now. And many of the patients with traumatic brain injury, they are prone to becoming a homeless person because they lose their jobs. They're not able to perform well at their work. They're not able to keep up with the routine. They're not able to keep up with the schedule. They are also prone to going to prisons because they suffer from these mood and behavioral disturbances, which can lead them into difficulties with the law. Suicide is another a very common area where traumatic brain injury patients are becoming prone to. They can become suicidal and they can commit suicide. So this is a national epidemic which is unrecognized, and as a result, many of the patients are suffering on a daily basis.
Again, I want to thank you very much for being on the show. You've added a lot of insight.
Thank you very much.
By the way, how long has this case been going on?
It's been going on since August of 2018. So, well, that's when the crash happened. It was a few months after that crash when Brandon contacted me. So almost 3 years now.
Yeah, because you're scheduled for trial on this in 2022, is that right?
We currently are scheduled in 2022, but again, with the way that COVID has affected everything, I think all of those are soft dates at this point.
And the uniqueness of this case, once again, is what primarily?
Well, the uniqueness in one is the way that it has been defended, I think, has been very dishonest and not forthright at all. And it's particularly troubling because the traumatic brain injury that Brandon has suffered has changed his personality to the point where he is angry most of the time. And it's disheartening to think that the Brandon Dickerson that this jury is going to meet is an angry man. But that wasn't him. That wasn't him. That's part of his injury. And that's one of those things that we're going to have to explain, and they're going to have to understand that this really was a loving father and husband before this crash.
Should you go to trial, when a jury is determining the damages, we've got medical damages, we've got the economic damages, he can't drive a truck anymore. What about that extra bit that you just mentioned where he's maybe not the same kind of guy he was before, he is not the same kind of guy he was before, and maybe there's a loss of, a happiness within his family. Maybe his family disbands after that. I don't know. How is that determined?
Well, Steve, we talked before we started today, we talked about, one of the great joys of my life is my 18-month-old daughter and the relationship that I have with her and how special that is. Brandon had that too. But now his children are scared of him. Or his child, is scared of him. His wife, while she loves him and is trying to be supportive, she's scared of him. What is that worth? That is the essence of life, in my opinion, and he's lost that.
Right. But the jury does take that into consideration.
They certainly do.
And can put a dollar amount on that.
They can put a dollar amount not only on that, and then we're also going to ask the jury in this case to put a dollar amount on the bad behavior that Madrid's hotshots engaged in, and putting everybody on the road at risk.
Well, good luck with it. Keep us posted, and thank you for being on the show.
Will do, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.